Hi, good evening,
Hi.
Clara. Good evening. So, I want to start off this interview today and ask you a couple of questions. My first question is as follows. Do you feel that your journey is different to that of others who left the ultra Orthodox Jewish community? And how so?
So I believe we all have different journeys. Even if it seems identical, it's still different because we're all raised in different families. We all have different personalities. So it's always going to be different. And in my case, I think it's even more different because we were the first really from family who left the Hasidic community after we already had kids. We had a family of 4 kids, and we were so from Hasidic. I think there was a Litvish family who left, a big family. I don't know if it was right before us or right after us, but we were like the first, at least what I knew, and it was really, it felt like going into the wilderness. Like I had no clue, no reference point of how this can turn out. All I knew is all the threats that were made all the time. Like, you're never going to succeed and it's never going to work and it's impossible. And many people have already tried and it's just, it's doomed to fail.
Thank you. How did you manage to keep yourself and your family together during those times when you had your ship thrown from side to side?
That is a great question. I feel like in life, we are given a chance to pick up tools along the way. And for me, it was really miraculous that I came across a book that I found out about through the grapevine, that there was a book out there that can help me understand one of my family members who had borderline personality disorder. It's a book called Walking on Eggshells. So I borrowed the book and I didn't even read the book. I just checked in the back and I saw a bibliography of other books they sell. One of them said something like, do you want to get rid of guilt? Like, this is the book for you. And the book was called Better Boundaries. And I was like, yes, this is it. This is what I need. This is what I desperately need. I can't live anymore without that book to know how I can stop feeling all the time so guilty. And when I got the book in the mail, what happened was I didn't even know the definition of boundaries, but I got the gist of it, like the way they described it. And my English was so poor and their language was so, like, it was a higher English than I was even familiar with. So I just read the book, just picking up a little bit of what they're talking about. And even though I did not understand all of it, it had such an incredibly powerful effect. It was the first time in my life where I realized I don't have to be a doormat. I don't have to put everybody first and like as if I don't exist. I'm also a human. And they explained how you should cherish your life. It was very down to earth, even though the English was not so familiar. It was very down to earth. So I feel like this was the key for me because after I left, what really happened is, as you said, it was almost like a ship in the middle of a storm on the sea, and things got a lot worse before they got better. So it was really the tools that I've implemented in my life of having better boundaries and knowing where to stop, like to really take care of myself. I have already had the trial and error before I left because I had read that book. And trial and error, I mean, like, seen for myself that every single time I neglect my needs, I become that mother that I don't want to be. I become that stressed wife that I hate myself being. So I knew this is non-negotiable. I need to put my needs first.
Wow. Wow. And can I ask you, Clara, do you feel that your journey was actually more spiritual and more godly in many ways compared to your journey prior to transition?
Absolutely. That's what I felt all along. I actually had my dad drive up with me to yell at like a woman's like a convalescent home where I went after I had my youngest child. And during the whole car ride, my dad was trying to convince me that it's my responsibility to take care of the holiness of the house. And even though my husband comes with new ideas, I should stand my ground and go in the tradition that I was raised with. And I argued with him. It was the first time that I argued with my dad. And I was very, very clear with my direction. And at one point, and I was crying, and then I was ashamed because the driver can think that the conversation is really like something, like it was a heated conversation. So I was so worried about Chilul Hashem. So when my dad went out and at the restroom, I was telling the driver, "Don't worry, I love my dad. It's just it's kind of like a misunderstanding. So we're getting through." Like I really didn't want him to get the wrong picture. But in the conversation, my dad had at one point said, you know how you can test if you are on the right path? When you speak to God and you feel close to God and you are answered. And I said, I am closer to God than I've ever been. I have seen my prayers answered more than ever before. Like, of course, this is actually true, you know, you're right. And it's just so complicated to explain to somebody who's used to seeing things black and white, and all their life they were raised to believe one thing, and to understand that there are other ways of living that can still be spiritual, you know, that it's very, very, it's beyond, it's, the brain doesn't know what the brain doesn't know, right? So it's like beyond their scope of what they can imagine, you know.
Wow, thanks so much for sharing that, Clara. Clara, would you say that your journey with your family intact was somewhat comparable to the forefather, Abraham, who is the father of all monotheistic religions? Would you say you could somehow perhaps relate to what he did, going against the current, going against everything everyone believed in and without fear?
It's very interesting that you bring up that question, because I did actually feel like that. And not only that, but on Passover, they say in the Haggadah, "Mitchila ovad avodah zara," right? That our forefathers were serving idols. And my husband showed me the Haggadah. Like, think about it, he said. Like, Abraham had to realize that his parents were wrong. Everybody around him actually had it wrong, you know? And this is what we learn from Abraham. So it's like that kind of zeal to go for the truth. I think that came from my upbringing.
Wow. Thanks so much for sharing that, Clara. Clara, would you consider putting out as the cover of your coming book that idea of a ship which is being washed away and being pushed with waves from side to side?
I think the book cover is the publisher's decision, but I haven't really dove in yet in that domain. So I don't know what I'm gonna do about the cover, but it's definitely something to consider.
Thank you. Shifa, do you see any parallels between your book and my book?
I think it's really, we both have very different journeys, but if there's one thing that we can compare very strongly, is the purity of heart, of really, we never meant to hurt anybody. We just needed to do what we needed to do, you know? It's like, it was do or die.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Clara. Clara, do you feel that your children have benefited through your amazing, unique life experience and through their own unique life experience of transition?
So that would have been a resounding yes when I left, because as you know, we both grew up in a black and white world, right? Right now, I believe they definitely benefited, but it's not like a fixed thing. It's a continuous journey of healing and growing and being open to understand. I have wronged my kids in many ways, and I have done a lot of mistakes. So always it's always a balance of understanding, like, where I'm coming from, to honor that, my needs, to honor that, and raising kids. What I learned is not about telling them what the right way is, but showing them. Kids don't learn from what we say, they learn from what we do. So what I want my kids to learn, I have to fill myself up with that. And that's basically what raising kids is for me all about.
Wow. Thanks so much for sharing that, Clara. Clara, would you mind sharing with us some of the different techniques you use to move against the current and to actually start believing in your spirit, in your mission in this life? What kind of techniques you used, and how did you put them to practice?
So that was also a very long journey, because it's like peeling back the layers and layers of what we were told is the right way and the only way, and discovering what our truth is, right? So it's one thing to want to honor yourself and learn to do that slowly but surely, but it's a whole different thing to actually discover your true self, because it's a journey, right? We keep on discovering more and more about ourselves. Even if you weren't raised in a cult-like community, you still have that journey of continuously discovering who you are, right? So what really helps me is two things. One is my curiosity. I am always very interested in learning and growing. And the other thing is basically what I told you before, honoring myself. So in the beginning of my journey, I had a very rough lesson of what happens when I just follow blindly somebody I trust and do things because I think they know what's right. And I was not ready yet for the repercussions. I didn't even grow up with the concept of action and reaction. I just had this blind belief that you are supposed to do things the way God said, and somehow miraculously things will work out. Like there was no connection, you know? And for me to realize that every action has a reaction, and I have to take responsibility when I make a decision, that there will be pros and there will be cons, and it's okay to make mistakes. And at the same time, it's okay to plan ahead. Am I already prepared for those consequences? You know? So when I left Tosh, I knew I was not prepared yet to put my kid in a non-Hasidic cheder. And my husband really wished that I would be. But he always honored me. He always respected where I was, you know? So I knew that if I did that, I would not have the support from my family, and I still needed it. I was still very, very much dependent on their support, even though they were not in the same terms as they were before I became a little bit different in my mindsets, you know? Like I had already grown out of the Tosh mindset in Tosh, and I started talking to her things about morals and things that she was a little bit like, my mom was a little bit like not sure if that's okay in Tosh, you know what I mean? But even if I spoke things that were questionable in their eyes, I still knew that they won't cut off with me. But I knew if I sent my kid to a non-Hasidic cheder, I risk the chance that they might have to cut off with me, because that's the rule. Like there are rules that you have to follow. It's not the parents who decide, it's the leaders, it's the whatever who's in charge. So yeah, so that's something that I really made sure as much as I could to only take steps on my own pace, only when I felt like I am ready for even the unforeseen consequences,
Thank you for sharing that with us. Can I ask you, Clara, what advice would you give to parents whose children choose a different path to their own? Do you think you'd have good advice that would help them?
That is a really challenging journey in itself. For me, when I put my kids in a non-Hasidic school, finally, there was a woman from Bells who came over to my house, and she really wanted me to persuade me to not continue that, to put them back in a Hasidic environment. And she had this whole long drasha and lecture about how amazing it is for kids to be sheltered, and even the goyim are jealous on the Jewish upbringing, that the kids are so pure. And if I put my kids in this, it was a Jewish daycare, but like it's not Hasidic, right? If I put my kids there, they're going to end up with sex and drugs and all kinds of things that like she tried to scare me, right? And what happened was I told her, listen, imagine there was a doctor that told me that jumping on a trampoline is amazing for my health. It's going to make me like so strong and healthy. It's good for my heart. All kinds of good promises. And I start jumping on a trampoline every single day. And then I find out that actually the studies show that it's the opposite. You actually die faster if you jump on a trampoline every day. Let's say that would be the case, right? Do you think I continue jumping on the trampoline? Obviously not, right? What if I started going on a bicycle every day instead? Because I heard that is a good thing. But then you come over and you tell me, oh my God, how don't you fear going on a bicycle? There could be a truck running you over any day. That's not a reason to go back to a trampoline. Wow. If I know the cheder is destructive for my child, why would I put my kid back there? Of course, putting him into a place where there is that's more open to the world can involve risks, but I can only do my part, right? When I go on a bicycle, I'll make sure to do the research. Where are the bike paths? How do you dress up safely? How do you go like in a time when it's not dark? How do you go? All the safety measures that you need to put in place, right? And the same when you put your kid in a school. You got to make sure that it's a good environment for your child. You keep track as much as you can. You can't control anybody's life, but you can make sure to do your part in ensuring a healthy environment, right? So that's basically how I started. And then I realized that actually, if I put my kids there, what if they're going to be exposed? And one day, my son comes home and he's in love with a woman of a different race, and like that's going to be quote unquote a very shameful thing to my parents. You know what I mean? And I was like, you know what? If he's going to be happy, like, why do I care? Why do I care what anybody else is going to say? My goal is that my kids have a happy and successful life. My goal is not what they're going to say or whoever is going to say whatever. You know what I mean? So I worked it out in my head already at that point that I am like, I registered all the different scenarios that I'm aware of that can happen. And still I knew that my job as a parent is to make sure I do my part to protect my child from potential hazard, right? From potential damage. And putting my kid in a school where he can be a kid, where he can actually learn the skills to succeed in the world, that is giving him a chance to have a good life. What he does with his life afterwards is his business. It's not mine. I can only control what I do. You know what I mean? And that's the only advice that I have for parents, like to start focusing on the things that you do have control over, not on the things that you don't. And when you do invest in the things that you have control over, there's no regret if things don't work out, because at least, you gave it your all,
Wow. Thanks so much for sharing that, Clara. Um, Clara, how did you feel when you first met me 7 years ago? How did you, what was it like? What was I like back then? That's more like the question. What was I like back then, 7 years ago?
You were the same pure, beautiful soul, just so, so much less aware of your amazingness and so shy and unsure, very unsure and very, you let yourself be pushed around a lot. Like when you told me stories of what was going on, it was like so painful to listen. Like it was almost like a beautiful flower being squashed from all sides and like trying to survive. And like I was hoping that you're gonna make it. I didn't even realize that it's possible, you know? I really didn't. It seemed so like it felt to me like me in that situation, I would be hopeless.
Wow. Thanks so much for sharing that, Clara.
You're welcome.
Um, I just wanted to ask you, would you mind if I tell people here the amazing changes I saw in yourself in the past 7 years?
Avrham, I don't know how you say it in English, but yeah.
So I've seen you really also blossom, and I found that you have found your voice, which is so deeply connected from within, and you've always had like a spiritual side to you, but it's become a lot more sharpened. You've honed in on it. And as you know, my channel is about spirituality. It's all about love and embrace. And I think that you really symbolize that on a pretty
Thank you.
deep level. In many ways, you're a lot further than I am. You have the life experience, and you've had to make choices, and you've had to face a ship being rattled from side to side. That's why it'd be amazing to me if I saw your book have a picture of a ship with waves from all sides, which would literally, quite literally define what you and your family experience. So that's why I initially mentioned that. But I really feel that you've found, you're settled, you're not afraid of things which you were afraid of back then even. And I must say, you were very helpful to me back then. You were supportive, you were a listening ear, you had creative means of helping me get through it. And you also helped me find my own inner spark and my own inner voice. And also you got me to realize that, you believe in yourself, everybody's your friend. When you believe in yourself, when you care for yourself, you see the whole world as a friendly place. And that's something which you've helped me tap into with time. And it's also part of your own growth, but it's also worth noting that it came from your own experience and your amazing life experience.
Thank you. Yes, I really believe that we teach people how to treat us. And I think I realized that as a teenager already. I had the unique privilege of being, first of all, by nature, very observant, but also seeing people on a deeper level. So I was able to see the beauty in some people, but I realized why they aren't respected, because they just didn't know that trick that they're letting people know as if they are a doormat, and that's why they're stepped all over. Like they're unknowingly inviting people to mistreat them. You know what I mean? And yeah, it's heartbreaking to me to watch. Like it's really like my thing is really to be seen, be appreciated is like the highest validation. And for me, that's the biggest joy to be able to do that for someone else.
Thank you. I have one last question, Clara. So today on Facebook, as the viewers could see, if you look at my Facebook page, which is now included on my profile here on YouTube, today, my YouTube channel, today on Facebook, I spoke about my own experience, what I was having to deal with when my ex-wife was right after her first dose of fertility treatment, and she was in a state of peril, and her body was shaking. Have you seen that post?
I know I saw a different post that I also love, so I'm not familiar with this particular one. I still have to see it.
So I actually started off the post saying this is quite triggering. Now, I wrote this in my book today. Obviously, it's still drafts in the state of draft, and it's still quite raw. But the impression I was trying to deliver was that I had deep compassion for my ex-wife at the time, but she was unable to show me any compassion when I was in a state of peril. And she was like from her perspective, it was like, of course you could go ahead and commit suicide. That's preferable to any other outcome, which might include you believing and being yourself. Now, I just wanted to point out that the observer might be seeing that and thinking, wow, she's a really cruel, bad person. Think as though that, and obviously I'm going to follow on with this in the next part of the book. It's not that she is or isn't a bad person. It wasn't my intent. My intent actually was to illustrate how deeply connected and how her entire lifestyle was based and defined by her community. And that's what I'm trying to point out. Although when you read it at this stage, you might think I'm really calling this person cruel. I had compassion for her when she was in this terrible state of peril, right? The doctors were like natural that she was going to survive. But actually, what I'm trying to point out is that she was so deeply defined by her community. And that really connects with a lot of what you said. These people are very, very deeply connected and defined by their community. And it would come to a point where they would prefer their spouse
Yeah,
commit suicide rather than they're in any way looked upon or frowned upon by their community. That is not a big deal to them. So I'm just wondering if you could relate to that.
I could very much relate to the violation of life, like the desecration of life. Like I feel like I actually had a conversation today on a Zoom call with a friend who I'm running, who I help run an organization called Duggery, and she had like somebody in the Zoom call had spoken about how sacred texts are such a big deal in the community where we come from. Like a Sefer Torah is like the highest thing. You're not supposed to put it down on the floor. Like there's so many things that happen. If you, even a Sefer, if it falls down, you have to kiss it, and you have to, like a mezuzah, you kiss it every time you pass it, right? There's so much emphasis put on sacred text. And then when it comes to human beings, which actually have feelings, like a text is a dry piece of paper, right? Human beings who actually have feelings, and you are taught that they have the tzelem elokim, like the godliness is in them, right? Yet the treatment they get is like with a being stomped with a boot, like with such viciousness. And it's not even, there's such a disconnect. There's not even the realization, like there's just this mindset that this is the right thing to do, and you just go forward and you do it. And what this taught me early on in my journey was what happens in this kind of society where people are not people, right? Because you become like a robot if you have so many unattainable goals and unrealistic expectations put on you, like so many rules. What happens is you got to turn off your any emotions, right? Otherwise you wouldn't function. You're in survival mode all the time. So there's no space for creativity and for actually thinking outside the box and really looking at the discrepancy, right? So for me, it's really very much something that drove me to leave, because it didn't fit with me. It didn't sit well with me. I had this whole big experience in the community where somebody I really admired was suddenly, her name was just trampled in the mud. Like her parnasa, her livelihood was on the line. Everything was on the line, and it was just because of some kind of competition that she had with somebody else in the community. And they were making rumors about her that she went to a brothel. It was like so horrific to me to watch how, like, almost like killing somebody in cold blood, right? And I stood up for her. So then I became also a threat. And it was a really kind of like a preface to my own story, because then it happened to my husband. But I had already had the perspective when it happened to my husband to realize that these are not people I can reason with. These are people who are so conditioned that there's no way I can get. In the story of my friend, I was really working so hard to convince my friends, my family, everybody, like, this is just a lie. This is just a politic, you know? And please help me stand for this woman and not let her blood be shed like that. And when it came to my story, I at least didn't have to spend and waste energy on thinking that somebody is going to get it, you know?
Wow. Thanks so much for sharing that, Clara. That was really inspirational. One last question, though. Last question. What do you think of how I have redefined prayer? And I pray with such intent every single day, and I do the nishmat prayer, and I do it with such intent, with such close connection, and I could say with a full heart that I've never felt so connected to my divine spirit and to God as a result. What do you think about that?
It brings me back to what you said earlier, that I am further along in the journey. I think the whole idea of hierarchy is a construct that is maybe rooted in white supremacy, maybe also in other things, but in my opinion, in my belief, there is so much that we don't realize about each other. Like the whole idea of spirituality, the whole idea of the essence of who you are is so precious and so unique, right? There's no way that somebody can tell about you something based on them. You are a unique light, and the way you express yourself, the way you connect to your godliness is your business, nobody else's, right? And just the idea of how you express about nishmat, I used to be so connected to that prayer because of the beautiful poetry. I was like, I love poetry, so I was like so glad when I learned the interpretation, the translation of that prayer, because yeah, I really connected with those words. It's really beautiful.
Thanks so much, Clara, for your time. I must tell you, you have really enriched my life and the life of everyone watching this. I'm really certain of that. I'm confident, and I'm really, really grateful to you. Thanks so much, and have a great evening.
Thank you so much to you, and you have enriched my life tenfold. And thank you for the interview. It was really a pleasure. Have a good evening.
You too. Thanks.